Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. Today's guest is Patty Lennon. She is a certified coach, author of Make Space for Magic, and founder of the Receiving School. Today, we'll be talking about how she blends brain science with metaphysics to help her fellow humans manifest their dreams into reality. Patty, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Very interesting background. You have a master's in psychology and spent time as a corporate banker. How did that morph into the current path you're on now?
Well, I left college. I had intended to go into law and into public law, doing public defender work with an intention of going up and becoming a politician. And in my final year of college, I worked in the public defender's office, and my love affair with our justice system broke my heart.
Oh my.
When I started to understand the way it actually operated. And I realized it wasn't a place that I could participate in. So I left college without a plan, and it was a terrible job market. So I got a temp job at a bank. And while I was there trying to figure out who I was going to be, I grew into a career, and I was there for 15 years. So I kind of fell into something that I loved. But towards the end of that career, I started to really want more meaning in what I was doing, which led me to start to mentor more in a more focused way, some of the team and the people that worked around me. And while I was doing that, I realized there was a lot going on in their mind that was affecting their performance and their ability to succeed. And I wanted to understand it better. So I started for a master's in psychology while I was at the bank, and the bank was kind enough to pay for it. The banking industry started to implode, and I had already decided that that was what I wanted to do full time. And so when the banking industry stopped really paying for that kind of work in-house, I went out on my own. Coaching was just becoming a thing back then. So I got a coaching certification. And through that journey, partly because I felt like I was finally sort of following the path that I think the divine wanted for me, I just got into much more spiritual teachings and learning about manifestation. And as I stepped into that world, there was a lot that just didn't jive with what I knew to be true from a brain science standpoint. A lot of what I was learning in the manifestation world, although it was helpful, it was missing things. It wasn't really built for all people. It was built for one type of person who tended to be a more privileged person. And I really felt then that it was important for me to start focusing on how to translate techniques in the spiritual world that I was learning so that more people could use them.
Very interesting path indeed. You mentioned brain science, and I'm pretty sure that your intuitive gifts, you didn't really discover them until you're about in your 30s, right? 34, 35?
Yes. Yeah. That was pretty wild. So there I was, a type A banker. And then I left banking, but still with that type A personality in place. But as I was working through my coaching training, I was exposed to people who had a lot more what I would call that woo-woo bend. And the more time I spent around them, the more I opened to these ideas of the other side of the veil and how we communicate. And I was out in a retreat in the desert with some of the coaches I was learning with. And all of a sudden, I just started to know things. And it just came out of the blue. I didn't have this history where, oh, yes, I used to be able to see dead people when I was young, but people criticized me, so I stopped doing it. It became really, yeah, I mean, that is usually the story you hear. That became really important to me, that people understand that this idea that we have about how gifts work are really limited to a few, right? And that there really is opportunity for all of us to have access to these heightened senses, these other sensory experiences of the universe, and combining the brain science. So understanding what was happening in the brain that makes it easier for someone to hear this information or see this information, what needs to happen in someone's real life to open up to these gifts. And that became a big focus of mine. Once, about 3 or 4 years into my journey with these gifts, I asked my guides once, why did I not have access to these gifts? Why would you just open them up at 35? And they told me that was a choice you made. You wanted to know fundamentally what it felt like to live in the world without that, because that knowledge would be necessary for you to be able to teach others who feel the same way how to transition into their gifts.
What you just said was a choice you made. That seems to indicate that was a choice you made in between incarnations before you actually came in to this world. Is that correct, or is that off base?
That's correct.
Wow. Do you suppose a lot of people that are in the corporate world do struggle with that grind that they're in every day, which is pretty intense? Do you think a lot of people really struggle with that and think, well, what about the spiritual side, the spiritual life, the spiritual world? Is that something I should learn about, or is that not necessarily true?
Most people I know in the corporate space or in an institutionalized space, whether it's academia or even the nonprofit sector, as much as they do good in the world, I do see that a lot of people have an ache inside of them. And I think they express it if you're not what I call woo or woo curious. So like woo curious is kind of like, that looks interesting. Like maybe they get a tarot reading once in a while kind of thing.
It sounds like what someone would say, this person is bi-curious. Instead of that, they're woo-curious. Interesting. But you're right. They do have that ache, a lot of them. I didn't notice that until I was older. And I think maybe when we're young, we have our blinders on. We're not really thinking about it. But it does make sense that as people get older, they start to think about what is missing. So I also noticed that you studied with shamanic practitioners also. What prompted you to study with them in the first place?
Part of it was just an evolution, what I was learning. So, some of the teachers that I was learning through, whether it was I was reading a book by someone, it's not like I went and worked with every single person personally, but you absorb information like through the Hicks team, Esther Hicks, and what she does with law of attraction and how she channels. And her work, I think, what her and Jerry Hicks did is a very robust, very authentic experience. But there's others out there that were teaching that felt like they were teaching to pop culture. And I started to crave learning that felt a little more grounded. And the more I reached for that, it was really teachers that came up through their gifts and came up through their teaching through a lineage. At first, I worked with someone who was teaching Reiki and learning Reiki. And then and that Reiki work then kind of opened me up to more of these indigenous cultures and the gifts that they bring to, Western culture now. And so things that just had that deep history felt more real to me, just even for the type A, even though I'm away from that type A personality, I'm still very pragmatic and I want to know the roots of something. That was a piece of it. But then another part was that I found out that I had fractured my spine when I was a child, and it was never known. The fracture was there, and the way the doctors describe it, it was a ticking time bomb that just that showed itself. I found myself drawn into the shamanic healing world to help with that because Western medicine could only go so far. And so part of it was just doing my own healing work.
Right. The Reiki seems to be like a non-threatening introduction to energy healing. It's almost like going to a massage therapist. But from there, connected the dots and say Reiki has its roots in shamanism, which is thousands of years old. So how important is the energy healing part? How does that inform your work?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think how it informs my work is that why I believe I am the way I am, why I chose the life I did, and why I've come to work in the way that I've come is because I fundamentally, my purpose is to help others understand how much they're loved by the divine, to understand that the playing field is fair. And that a lot of where we experience disparity or unfairness, going back to my justice days, is because we have a lot of wounds that we acquired through being human. And so always, in order to make that space for someone to feel the divine love that's available to them or to talk to the other side of the veil, requires being able to heal some things that aren't, wounds on the skin. They're wounds in the energetic body. They're wounds in the psyche. And a piece of it I can help them with. And when I can't, I like to know where they can go next to get that healing.
What is the brain science behind manifestation? And then how is that different from blending brain science with metaphysics?
Excellent question. So the brain science behind manifestation is understanding that manifestation in its essence is to have a desire and to have that desire met in a way that doesn't involve simple human effort. Meaning you can desire something and know you just don't have the ability to make it happen just exclusively on your own. And then yet miracles happen every day, right? And so that's manifestation, is the arrival of something in the material world that happens on the energetic level more than it happens on the human effort level. And so anytime we have a desire, that desire begins to be met by the universe, by the divine, if it's for our highest good. So when we have a desire and we ask for it simply by knowing we desire it, the universe, the divine, starts to make that manifest. But if it doesn't actually cross over the door from non-reality, from energy into our reality, it is because we're holding the door closed. And where we hold that door closed is in our mind. Our mind controls that energy field. And if it doesn't feel safe to receive, it will not allow the manifestations in. And so what that means is we need to make sure our brain is operating at a place where it feels safe and loved. And that's where the brain science comes in. What gets us into a place of fear? And the amygdala, which is that center of the fear brain, that's what generates all those fear thoughts and always feels like it's fighting off saber-toothed tigers. You need to understand how to reprogram it and to soothe it to have an open, receptive field. So that's where that connection is.
The brain science behind manifestation sounds similar to blending brain science with metaphysics. You mentioned divine love earlier. Did that come first, or was that discovered along the way?
My youngest memory is that I wanted to be a missionary, and from when I was little. And the reason was I was raised Irish Catholic, so missionary work was really the only context I had when I was small. Because the idea that there were people out in the world that didn't understand that God loved them broke my heart. And all I wanted to do was make sure that they knew that. So that piece of it has been with me from the very beginning. When I even wanted to go into public defender work, it was because the idea that there are people in our system that aren't taken care of the same way others are felt horrible to me. And that was the reason why I wanted to go the public defender route rather than the district attorney route. You know, even in banking, I would always try and make sure that everyone understood how to get proper footing inside the bank. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you get to yourself up to higher levels if that's what you want? You know, how do you get promoted? And I always came at it from understanding, like, here's how to make the playing field fair for you. And I don't think I was as conscious of the divine love in that part of my life because it was my 20s and I was partying and I was focused on succeeding and drinking and doing all that stuff.
Like everybody else at that age. I mean, and even beyond that.
Then when I did step into this world, I realized always what was holding people back is the misunderstanding that they were unsafe.
How does all this figure in the metaphysical world or quantum realm, if you will?
Well, the quantum realm, and let me just say that all the team that we have, right, outside beyond the field that we're used to playing in, this 3D, sometimes people think it's 4D, you know, out beyond that, there's this entire team, right, that we can work with and interact with. There's universal forces. But if your mind feels the only way it can be safe is what it controls and what it figures out, and this is what happens when we're traumatized at young ages, where we are left feeling unsafe at different points because we don't receive the full safety and security ever. Every single human does not receive all the safety and support they need from the older humans around them. We start to develop misunderstandings because we attach our relationship with the divine or the universe with the relationship of the humans that were supposed to take care of us. So if relying on them at some point was unsafe, relying on the quantum field, interacting with things that are outside of your human control feels unsafe. And so how you blend these two is you start to watch the thoughts, you do the work to open up the mind to being supported. Some of the magic flows in, some of the manifestations flow in, but then you get blocked again. And then okay, then now it's time to go back to my mind, to go back to the amygdala, and then it's just this constant massaging and moving and interacting. But once you start to really have an inherent faith in this divine love or this universal love, whatever word works for you, that's when you can trust the team, and that's when you can hear the subtle language that they speak to you with. But when the amygdala is super noisy, it's very hard to hear the language that the universal other side of the veil people, spirit team, are talking to you with.
If I understand this, you're making allusions to spirit guides, angels, those type of things beyond the veil. That part of the brain that you just mentioned, that's what you meant when you said the brain hijacks our intuitive gifts and keeps us from getting the help from our spirit friends. Does that make sense?
Correct.
Okay, good. That's a very interesting approach. I've never heard that before, and I think it could be very helpful. So let's talk about make space for magic. And there's also the receiving school, but I think it seems to me that to discuss make space for magic would be appropriate to discuss first.
Yes, absolutely. From a concept standpoint, the book Make Space for Magic I developed it originally with a goal of just telling my story of kind of going from this type A person to now having access to regular communication with the other side of the veil, both for myself and on behalf of my clients. And I wanted people to see the dips in my journey, that they involved drinking a lot when I was in my 20s, that they involved making disappointing choices, that they involved me questioning my ability to parent a kid, because there's like a lot of things that happen in people's day-to-day lives that I think make them feel not special enough to have gifts. That if you're someone that has gifts, you sort of like float through life, and you are always in love, and in a loving, compassionate relationship with others. And it's not the case. And so that was the original goal of the book, was just tell the story. But the more I taught it from stages and more I told the stories, I saw that people really had a craving for like, okay, but how do I make space for this magic to come in? How do I do it in my mind? But also, what are the functional things I can do in my day-to-day life that actually allow me to interact with the other side of the veil in a different way, so that things are coming easier, so I can rest more, so I feel like less of a failure just because I'm not perfect. And that's essentially what making space for magic is.
It starts to make more sense when we talk about the receiving school, because it would seem to be that as we're talking about spirit guides and angels and our friends beyond the veil, I've been told, I don't know how many times, every single one of us has spirit guides, literally from day one, everybody. Is the receiving school a manual for showing us how to take it in, how to receive love from our spirit guide friends?
Yes. And it's an experiential program in that it gives you ways to interact with your life, to start to notice where your resistance is. And that, because what happens is people know, oh yeah, I'm not good at receiving. If you're not good at receiving even compliments or help from a friend, I guarantee you the exact same block is why you can't receive communication from the other side of the veil. What is happening in the brain to cause that block is the same. So you can be working in any part of your life to lower your resistance and open up to receiving and affect all the areas. So the receiving school is different than normally like a course you would take where it tells you like how to do things. And it actually just shows you how to interact with your day-to-day life so that it reveals your blocks to you, that you're not doing worksheets to try and find the block. You're actually just going to go about your regular day and do this one thing differently. And all of a sudden that one little thing each week reveals a huge block. And then you get the pieces of the puzzle on how to release the block. So in the beginning of the program, we're focused almost exclusively on the material world, letting in money, love, and support. And then as we get towards the end of the program, where there's more opportunity for you to see those blocks and release them in very tangible ways, that's when we work on opening up to receiving communications.
Your work has a lot to do with blending traditional psychology and I don't want to say the woo world, but the metaphysical side of things. I like to use the word metaphysical rather than spiritual because metaphysical has to do with a way of understanding things, whereas spiritual is more of an actual practice. And I've heard this many, many times before where the word spiritual tends to be overused and the brand is actually watered down. Whereas if you go onto iTunes and look at a bunch of spiritual podcasts, a lot of them are just celebrities giving advice, which doesn't have a whole lot to do with spirituality, does it?
No.
So can we assume then that what you're doing is basically a blend of psychology and the metaphysical, or is that not quite a good enough description?
No, I think that's completely accurate. And what I think also metaphysics leaves space for is that, and this is a belief that many teachers have. I don't personally have it, but I think it's a reasonable belief, especially if you weren't brought up in the context of a single God or source. Like if that doesn't resonate with you, metaphysics leaves space for you to have an opinion that source, the universe, is either neutral or benevolent. Now, I personally believe it's benevolent, but there's a lot of people who that doesn't match with what they know to be true in the world, right? And so what I teach can be used whether you believe the divine is benevolent or neutral, right?
That's a very interesting point, benevolent or neutral. But it does leave room for that opinion. While we're speaking about the divine, your path, your discovery of your intuition, how has that colored or shaped your beliefs in religion? Has it changed, or is it pretty much the same as it's always been?
In some ways, it's released me from a lot of guilt around like a feeling like you have to do certain practices to be good inside the scope of your relationship to God, source, whatever words you want to use. So because I communicate with the other side so fluidly, I know there's lots of ways to be in that relationship. I also know that the divine source wants nothing other than an intimate relationship with us. It wants our truth, whatever that is, as ugly or as angry or as rage-filled or as beautiful or as hopeful as it is. It wants simply intimacy, honesty. And that is the part that's shifted my relationship to religion or spirituality the most. Because although I was raised, even though I was Irish Catholic, most of the people that influenced me believed that God was good. There was a lot of guilt in the way I was raised. And I know a lot of people were raised with that guilt, and the communication from the other side makes sense of all the little nuanced guilt. Like I'm not doing, even now, like sometimes I might feel critical of myself if I'm not meditating, because I know a good practitioner or whatever meditates, right? And then they'll just talk to me and say, no, go for a walk. You don't need more time in your head. Your head's not where you need to be right now. You don't need to be working on releasing your thoughts. Just go spend time with me in nature. Appreciate something that has been created out of nothingness. All of that is considered sacred when we bring love to it.
When you say all the divine really wants is our truth, no matter how beautiful or ugly it is, it reminds me of what I was told recently was that the divine, whatever you want to call it, source, God, that's how the divine learns from us. Does that make sense?
Yep.
The divine's going to learn from us. I just think when we address that ache that you mentioned earlier, I think that has a lot to do with what really happens when we die. Who is God? What is God? Why are we here? What's our purpose? Meanwhile, when we have this well-paying job, you're making ridiculous amounts of money, you're partying, you've got really cool friends and nice cars, but that's something that's missing. It seems to me that comes up probably a lot more than we think. You probably feel pretty lucky that you found this path.
I feel blessed by it every single day. Absolutely.
How can the average person going to work every day, doing the grind, taking care of the family and so on, how do they get there? What's the first step they take?
The very first baby step that I recommend anyone takes is when you get up in the morning, make the first interaction be between you and you. So often when people get up, they're either turning over to their partner, responding to a child or a pet, or picking up their device, or going through their to-do list for the day. All of these things involve other people's agendas for their life. And that's generally our biggest block to having this point of connection. So if the first thing you do when you get up in the morning is just breathe and like follow the breath to the center of your body and out, to the center of your body and out. I used to ask people to do this for 10 minutes. I've now gotten down to just 3 deep breaths. 3 deep breaths is where I can get everyone to meet me. It's the commitment that I feel 99% of the people will make. So that's the ask. And what's fascinating is, and this is sort of the kind of experiential stuff we do in receiving school. So I'm asking you to take 3 deep breaths the first thing you get up. The thing is that takes 30 seconds, but it also brings all this awareness to, you're right. When I first get up, I'm not focused on my truth and what might be coming through first thing in the morning, which is the richest time to get information. I've already started going out to obligations, to others, to what do I need to do to accommodate this world out there rather than be connected. So that's the teeny tiny baby step. And if you want a big, gigantic step to do that will really shift things is to do what I call receive everything. And that means, if you do any like manifestation learning, they'll always say, make sure you receive compliments, receive any gifts that people give you, receive, the good stuff that's coming, but receive the negative stuff, receive the difficult stuff. Like if you have debt, receive that truth. And so many people think if they receive it, meaning they accept it, that they're saying, I'm going to hold on to it. But that's not what happens. When you receive it, you stop being in this resisting relationship with it. And that lack of resistance starts to flow miracles in quicker than anything else.
The receiving part goes back to the receiving school because we need to be receivers. It's like catching a pass. All right, now we get into the fun stuff. The myths and mistruths that are taught in the spiritual and personal development worlds. I'm sure a lot of us really want to hear about what they are.
Well, the biggest one is that you manifest, you bring good stuff into your life by staying positive, and that there's always this need to be like visualizing and seeing the good stuff and transmuting everything instantly into positivity. And that's really toxic. That is the biggest mistake that's taught. Because what happens when you have every single human, every single day experiences something that causes a negative emotion. I mean, short of you being in a room meditating all day long, most likely you're going to have some small engagement or big engagement that's going to get you angry. It's going to bring you down. And if it's on the bigger side, it's going to be pretty heavy. And if you listen to that talk out there that you have to be positive, what happens is you're actually going to just shove it down deep inside your body, and you're using a tremendous amount of resistance to do it. You're also messing with your mind because you're basically telling yourself it's not safe to be fully you. So that's the biggest one and the answer is let yourself feel your true emotions. You cannot hold on to an emotional reaction for longer than 45 seconds to a minute. It's impossible. The physiological response to emotion does not last longer than that. The reason it ends up feeling like it's lasting for days and weeks is because, one, you're trying to resist it. And then when you're allowing it to come up, you're feeding thoughts into it. So if you feed thoughts into an emotional reaction, it will then start a second emotional reaction, a third, a fourth. If you push it down, your brain is going to spend all its time trying to get you to work at it. And on top of it, you can be feeling really bad if it's legitimate. Meaning like if someone was an idiot, cut you off, be angry about that for like a minute, 2 minutes. But if you're still thinking about it like 3 days from now you're messing with yourself. And then you do need to lean into that stay positive kind of thing. But if you're, and then maybe you were really traumatized by it. Maybe you were just in a car accident the week before, right? Well, then you give yourself a couple of days because you're still processing that trauma. But you're not, just because you're processing a difficult emotion, you're not blocking good stuff from coming in because you're in non-resistance. So the divine does not need you to be happy to give you good stuff. And almost always when you're in your low points is when your spirit team is like jumping in and wanting to help so bad. So if you keep pretending you're fine, you're blocking their help. So that's the biggest mistruth.
Really, really good point.
And then the other one is that if what you desire hasn't arrived, whether it's material or communication from the other side of the veil, this belief that you're not doing something good enough, you're not visualizing enough, you're not vision boarding well enough, you're not acting as if enough, completely untrue. The divine is omnipotent. It does not need a vision board to figure out that you would like to pay off your debt, that you would like to go on a vacation, right? The minute you have a desire, if that desire being met is for your highest good, it is starting to be met. Vision boards, visualization, acting as if work wonderfully if you're a highly developed right brain. But if you're a highly developed left brain, that will never work for you because your brain will keep calling bullshit. So it does work. These people that are teaching it works really well for them.
It works very well for one type, as you mentioned before, right?
Right. But if someone doesn't understand that they're a highly right-brained person and that's why it works for them, they will teach it like it's the gospel. And they will conclude that the reason you don't have your new car is because you're not visualizing properly. But that's not it.
Quite simply, that might not be your highest and best use.
Right. Or you may be in so much resistance to it that it's not able to come through. But the resistance isn't fixed by a vision board for most people. Resistance is fixed by the stuff I talked about already, which is honor your true feelings. Allow all the gifts in, bad and good. Honor what's true for you. Connect to yourself in the morning, in the day.
In your work, you mentioned the vibration of the planet is opening all humans up to increased spiritual metaphysical connection. Is that the same thing as the ascension, or is it different?
It's a symptom of the ascension. 40 years ago, the vibration on this planet was such that not everyone could communicate with the other side of the veil easily. The vibration we were all operating in made it very hard for us to get to a vibrational level that would be a match for the communication. As we are ascending as a people, our vibration is lifting, even for the people that are acting like nuts right now, that look like they don't even know that we are all connected, right? Everyone is that fervor that we're all feeling from like what we consider like the other side, whoever the other side is, like in a debate or whatever. That's actually natural in the process of evolution, of any evolution. The lowest part of the evolution body is going to resist it, right? And fight it. But, a rising tide lifts all boats. So the vibration is rising on the planet because we are evolving as a people. And because we have that higher vibration, that is why we all have access to the other side of the veil.
So in other words, the veil is actually becoming thinner.
I know that's how a lot of people describe it. I would say our perception that there is a veil is getting thinner because the veil is the vibrational difference, right? It's just that border between the human earth-based vibration and then the vibration of the upper dimensions. Because ours is getting, higher, this doesn't look so thick anymore.
Can we just say that there's just more access to the veil than there was 30 or 40 years ago?
Yeah, the membrane, the perception of the membrane is just different. Yeah, it is looser.
Now that we know that, what are some simple ways for us to connect with spirit guides, angels, and our loved ones that are not here anymore?
To me, the best way, because no matter where you are in that woo curious, I don't believe it all spectrum, is signs. I think signs are the easiest way. And in order to get signs, asking for them with specificity really helps. If you feel very doubtful, like if you really question, is anyone there for me? Make your sign that you want to see to answer a particular question, whether it's, are you there, Grandpa? Or spirit guide, should I take this job? If I should, show me this sign, and make it really outrageous. A dancing shamrock with a purple hat, right? Something that you just don't think you've ever seen before. But if you're not in that level of doubt, then having something that's a regular sign that a loved one or your spirit guide can give you when you need assurance is really great. And having a personal connection to it can really help. So, for instance, my father, we're Irish, and he was very attached to his Irish heritage. So when I see shamrocks, real shamrocks, I know he's there. And my mother, her favorite flower were daisies. And so when I see daisies pop up, in an unexpected way, you kind of get this whoosh of warmth inside of you when you see it. That's your proof that it's a sign versus just another daisy. That to me is the easiest way. Even if you're not out of your mind yet, like, your mental game, your mind can see signs, it can take them in, right?
You're convinced that they're there. I think people, they have to be open to it. They have to be receivers. If they don't believe in anything, then it's probably not going to happen.
Actually, nope. I've turned complete cynics around because of this practice.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's encouraging. What can we expect from the Space for Magic podcast?
So my goal in the Space for Magic podcast is to share both my journey as I'm learning. So I'm live teaching my own personal journey. I try and stay in the moment with the energy that's happening on the planet, like right now. So for instance, at the moment we're recording this, there is a very intense, chaotic, energetic storm happening. It's very hard for people who have been able to rely on their gifts to hear and see clearly. And so I'm talking about the tools they can use, the alternative tools that you can use when things are really unclear. Also, guests who have developed techniques or have had unique journeys in opening up to space for magic, so that listeners get a chance to learn from other people's journey on how they navigate this, being one foot in the real world and yet also knowing that their other foot is truly the soul that they came with.
I'm going to make sure I put a link to that along with show notes and transcript. Patty, thanks so much for joining us today. How can our listeners find out more about you online?
Thank you for having me, Johnny. The best place to go is pattylennon.com, and then just put a / make space for magic. You'll see whatever free offerings we have out right now will all be there on the page.
Excellent. You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing. You can also leave us a review on iTunes as well. For more info, go to closertovenus.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.